I stand in front of the lawyer's office, heart pounding in my chest. Not because of the $4.6 million at stake, but because this is the last time my grandfather will ever speak to us. Through the frosted glass, I can see Richard already inside, wearing that smug smile he's had since Grandpa passed. He's been telling everyone the money is all his. What he doesn't know is that Grandpa and I shared something more valuable than money, the truth. Before I dive into this family drama that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling family. My grandfather, William Thomas, wasn't just any businessman. He built his real estate empire from nothing, turning a single property investment into a multi-million-dollar company that dominated our city's skyline. But to me, he wasn't just the man with the impressive bank account. He was the person who taught me to fish at dawn, who slipped me $20 bills for ice cream even when I was 20 years old, and who always had time to listen when everyone else was too busy. Money comes and goes, Matthew, he would tell me while we sat on his back porch watching the sunset. But who you are when nobody's watching, that's what defines you. Grandpa William was stern but fair. He believed in hard work, honesty, and doing right by people. He wore the same watch for 40 years, even though he could afford any luxury timepiece. "This one keeps good time," he'd say, when I asked why he didn't upgrade. Why would I need another Richard? My older brother by 5 years was different. From childhood, he wanted to be like Grandpa, but only because of the wealth and power. He misunderstood everything that made our grandfather truly special. When I run the company, Richard would boast at family gatherings when we were teenagers, "I'll expand to 3 more states. Grandfather is too conservative with his investments." I still remember how Grandpa would nod politely while I noticed the slight disappointment in his eyes. Richard began working at the family company straight out of college with his business degree. I chose a different path, studying graphic design and working as a freelance artist. Richard never missed an opportunity to point out the disparity in our incomes. Still drawing pictures for a living, he asked at Thanksgiving dinner when I was 23. "Grandfather built an empire, and you're making coffee shop logos." "Matthew has talent," Grandpa interjected. "He sees the world differently. That's a gift." Richard's face darkened. He hated when Grandpa defended me, especially when it came to my career choices. It became his mission to make me look bad whenever possible. During a family Christmas, Richard accidentally spilled wine on my portfolio I had brought to show Grandpa my latest work. When I received a small design award, Richard told Grandpa it was just a participation trophy. Each incident seemed minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern of deliberate sabotage. Then Grandpa turned 80, and his health began to decline. Nothing serious at first. Some arthritis, slightly elevated blood pressure. But Richard suddenly became extremely attentive, visiting Grandpa 3 or 4 times a week, insisting on taking him to doctor appointments, and gradually limiting other family members' access. "Grandfather gets tired easily now," he'd say. "Too many visitors stress him out." I noticed changes in Grandpa's financial decisions, too. He had always donated generously to local charities, but those donations stopped. The modest house he had lived in for decades was suddenly up for sale, with plans to move him into a luxury condo that Richard had picked out. The suspicion gnawed at me, but I had no proof until that evening in March. I had brought dinner over to Grandpa's house using my spare key since Richard had claimed Grandpa was napping. Instead, I heard Richard's voice from the study door, slightly ajar. "Everything's in place," Richard said, his voice low. "Once the new documents are signed, the assets will be secure. He doesn't need to know all the details." I froze in the hallway dinner, getting cold in my hands. And Matthew, a voice I didn't recognize, asked. Richard chuckled. "Matthew won't be an issue. He has no head for business. By the time he figures anything out, it'll be too late." My stomach twisted into knots. I had suspected Richard was up to something, but hearing him plotting so coldly made it real. I quietly left without making my presence known, the untouched dinner still in my hands and a terrible weight in my chest. The confrontation with Richard happened 3 days later. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on my work. Finally, I called and asked to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, away from Grandpa's house where we might be overheard. "I know what you're doing," I said. "As soon as we sat down, I heard you talking about Grandpa's assets, about making sure I don't figure things out." Richard's expression shifted from surprise to calculated calmness in seconds. "I don't know what you think you heard, but you're mistaken." Am I? The sudden changes in Grandpa's financial decisions. The way you're isolating him from the family. It's elder abuse, Richard. His face hardened. "This is exactly why Grandfather knows I should handle the business matters. You always were too emotional, too naive. I'm protecting his interests while you're busy drawing pictures." "Protecting whose interests?" "Because it seems like you're only looking out for yourself." Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Listen carefully, little brother. I've been building my relationship with Grandfather for years. I understand what he wants for the company, for his legacy. You swoop in occasionally with your sentimentality and art projects, but I'm the one who's there every day. Because you're keeping everyone else away," I hissed back. "If you push this, if you cause problems—" Richard's eyes narrowed. "I will make sure you never see Grandfather again. I'll tell him how you're only interested in his money now that he's getting older. How do you think that will make him feel about his precious artistic grandson?" The threat knocked the wind from me. Richard knew exactly how to hurt me. The idea of Grandpa believing I only cared about his money was unbearable. I left the coffee shop shaking, feeling completely outmaneuvered. Within weeks, Richard's campaign against me began. Subtle at first, then increasingly blatant. At a family dinner, he casually mentioned that I had asked him about Grandpa's will recently. I told Matthew it wasn't appropriate to discuss such things while Grandfather is still with us. He said, shooting me a look that dared me to contradict him. I was stunned, silent. I had never asked about any will. By summer, rumors were swirling among extended family that I had financial problems and was pressuring Grandpa for money. My cousins became distant. My Aunt Margaret, once warm and affectionate, now greeted me with cool suspicion. When I tried calling Grandpa, the calls went unanswered. When I visited his house, the housekeeper informed me he was resting or out with Richard. His phone number changed, with Richard claiming it was to reduce telemarketing calls. "Grandfather is very tired these days," Richard would say when I demanded to see him. "The doctor recommends limiting visitors to reduce stress. I'll tell him you stopped by." Desperate for answers, I began investigating Richard's activities at the company. I still had a few friends there from the times I'd visited Grandpa at work. One evening, I met with Sarah, Grandpa's former executive assistant, who had recently retired, pushed out by Richard, as it turned out. "Something's not right with the accounts," Sarah confided, sliding a folder across the table at the quiet restaurant where we met. "Richard has been moving money around, setting up new companies. Your grandfather wouldn't recognize half the transactions happening in his name." The folder contained printouts of financial statements, bank transfers to unfamiliar LLCs, and, most disturbing of all documents, with what appeared to be Grandpa's signature, edit quote. But the handwriting didn't match his normal style. "That's not his signature," I said, staring at the papers. "I know his handwriting." Sarah nodded grimly. "I thought so too. There's more. Richard fired the entire accounting team that had been with your grandfather for decades, brought in his own people." Over the next month, I gathered more evidence. A former accountant shared records showing Richard had diverted nearly $800,000 to a separate account in just 3 months. A paralegal from the company's law firm, speaking anonymously, confirmed that several properties had been transferred to new entities controlled solely by Richard. The picture, becoming clear, was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't just Richard angling for a larger inheritance. He was actively stealing from Grandpa while he was still alive, systematically looting the company Grandpa had built over his lifetime. I compiled everything into a detailed file unsure what my next move should be. Should I go to the police? Try again to reach Grandpa directly. Confront Richard with the evidence. Before I could decide, my phone rang at 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday in September. Matthew Thomas, an unfamiliar voice asked when I answered the phone, groggy and disoriented. Yes, that's me. This is Mercy Hospital. I'm calling about your grandfather, William Thomas. He's been admitted with a suspected stroke. The world stopped. I dressed in a panic and drove too fast across town, my mind racing with terrible possibilities. When I arrived, a doctor explained that Grandpa had suffered a major stroke. He was stabilized but unconscious. Has anyone else from the family been notified? I asked. Yes, his grandson Richard has been here. He stepped out to make some calls. I sat by Grandpa's bedside, holding his frail hand, listening to the steady beep of monitors. He looked so small in the hospital bed, nothing like the towering figure of strength I'd known all my life. I'm here, Grandpa, I whispered. I know what's been happening. I'm going to fix it, I promise. Richard appeared in the doorway, surprise and annoyance flashing across his face before he composed himself. The doctor called me, I said before he could speak. I had a right to know. Of course, Richard said smoothly. I was just about to call you myself. Over the next 3 days, we engaged in a silent war over Grandpa's bedside. Richard tried repeatedly to have me removed, claiming Grandpa needed rest, but I refused to leave. On the 4th morning, I stepped out briefly to shower and change clothes. When I returned 2 hours later, the room was empty, the bed stripped. My heart stopped. A nurse saw my expression and quickly approached. Mr. Thomas was discharged about an hour ago, she explained. His grandson had private medical transport arranged. Richard had moved him without telling me. When I called Richard's phone, it went straight to voicemail. When I went to Grandpa's house, the housekeeper informed me they had gone to Richard's lake house to recuperate in peace. For 2 weeks, I couldn't reach them. Richard had taken Grandpa to his remote property, where he controlled all access and communication. My calls went unanswered. When I drove out there, security guards at the gate refused to let me in. Then, on October 7th, I received a text message from Richard's grandfather, passed peacefully in his sleep last night, funeral Saturday at Green Hills. Family only. The message hit me like a physical blow. Grandpa was gone, and I hadn't even had the chance to say goodbye. When I called Richard demanding details, he was coldly efficient. The stroke was too severe for recovery. He never regained consciousness. Why didn't you tell me he was getting worse? I asked, my voice breaking. I made the decisions Grandfather would have wanted. The funeral is private, immediate family only. I am immediate family, I shouted. Barely. Richard replied. Saturday at 10:00 a.m. Don't make a scene. The funeral was a small, somber affair. Richard had arranged everything, positioning himself prominently as the devoted grandson who had cared for Grandfather in his final days. I sat in the back row, ignored by most of the family who had bought into Richard's narrative about me. As the service concluded, Richard approached the podium. My grandfather was a great man who built something extraordinary. He said, his voice appropriately solemn. He entrusted me with his company and his legacy. I've been handling his affairs for some time now, and I can assure you that his wishes will be honored precisely as he intended. The estate will be settled quickly and privately as he would have wanted. The implication was clear. Richard had already taken control of everything. Several relatives glanced my way with pity or curiosity. The message had been delivered. Richard was in charge, and I was an afterthought. As people filed out, I felt a tap on my shoulder. An older man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses handed me a business card. James Jefferson, your grandfather's attorney, he said quietly. Could we speak privately tomorrow morning at my office, 10 o'clock? Before I could respond, he walked away, leaving me clutching his card and feeling the first glimmer of hope in months. The next morning, I arrived at Jefferson's office downtown 15 minutes early. The receptionist showed me in immediately to a wood-paneled conference room where Jefferson waited with a folder and a small box. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thomas," Jefferson said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've been your grandfather's attorney for 30 years. He came to see me privately about a month before his stroke. He did. This surprised me. Richard has been controlling all his appointments." Jefferson nodded. William was quite aware of that fact. He arranged our meeting when Richard was out of town, asked his old friend Dr. Patterson to drive him to my office. Hope and dread competed in my chest. What did he want? He was concerned about certain activities at his company, transactions. He hadn't authorized documents he supposedly signed, but had no memory of signing. Jefferson adjusted his glasses. "Your grandfather was old school, Mr. Thomas. He kept his own set of books, reconciled his own accounts. He knew something was wrong." "Richard," I said, "he's been stealing from Grandpa, moving assets. Your grandfather suspected as much. He asked me to conduct a quiet audit which confirmed his suspicions." Jefferson tapped the folder. "We also took certain precautions regarding his will and estate plan. The official reading is scheduled for tomorrow at 2:00 p.m. Does Richard know about this?" "He believes he knows the contents of your grandfather's will. What he doesn't know is that William executed a new will during our meeting with very specific provisions. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Grandpa had known. He hadn't been completely deceived. Richard called me last night, I told Jefferson. He said the will reading was just a formality, that everything had already been decided." Jefferson's expression remained neutral, professional. "I suggest you attend tomorrow, regardless of what your brother has told you. Your grandfather left something specific for you as well." He handed me the small box. "He asked that you receive this beforehand." Inside was Grandpa's watch, the simple timepiece he'd worn for 40 years. Attached was a note in his familiar handwriting. "Time reveals all truths. See you at the reading." That night, my phone rang just after midnight. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "I know. You met with Jefferson," he said without preamble, his voice taut with anger. "What did he tell you?" "That I should attend the will reading tomorrow." I answered simply. "There's no point. The will is clear. Grandfather left the company and the majority of his assets to me. He and I discussed it extensively. Then, I guess you have nothing to worry about." Richard's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. If you challenge the will, if you make any accusations about how I cared for Grandfather, I will destroy you. I will use every resource of this company to bury you in litigation until you don't have a penny to your name. Walk away now, with whatever small bequest he left you, and we can both move on." I looked down at Grandpa's watch on my wrist. "I'll see you tomorrow, Richard." Jefferson's law office felt different the next day. The tension in the air was palpable as I walked in. Richard and his wife, Sophia, were already seated in the conference room, along with Aunt Margaret and Uncle David. Richard barely glanced at me, but Sophia smirked openly when I took a seat at the far end of the table. "Now that everyone is here," Jefferson began, "we can proceed with the reading of William Thomas's last will and testament." He started with the standard legal language, the formal declaration of sound mind. Richard sat relaxed, occasionally whispering something to Sophia that made her smile. I focused on Grandpa's watch, drawing strength from it. "To my grandson, Richard Thomas Jefferson, read who has expressed such interest in my company and financial affairs." Richard straightened his expression, shifting to one of smug satisfaction. "I leave my controlling interest in Thomas Real Estate Holdings, valued at approximately $4 million, along with liquid assets of approximately $600,000. Richard nodded as if this merely confirmed what he already knew. Sophia squeezed his hand in celebration. However, Jefferson continued, his voice unchanging, but somehow more present in the room. "This bequest is contingent upon the completion of a full forensic audit of all company accounts transactions, and document signatories for the past 18 months to be conducted by an independent firm of my attorney's choosing. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Richard's body went rigid. Should this audit reveal any financial irregularities, unauthorized transactions, or falsified documents? Jefferson continued, all assets will instead be distributed according to the contingency plan detailed in Section B. What Richard stood up suddenly. This is absurd. There was no mention of an audit in the will I discussed with him. Jefferson looked at him calmly. I'm reading the legal will as executed and notarized on August 12th. If you saw a different document, it was not the official will. This is a mistake. Richard insisted, his face flushing. Grandfather and I reviewed his estate plan extensively. He never mentioned any audit. Your grandfather was quite specific about this provision, Jefferson replied, then continued reading. Furthermore, I have prepared a video statement explaining my concerns and decisions to be played now. Jefferson pressed a button on a remote, and a large screen on the wall came to life. Grandpa appeared sitting in this very conference room, looking tired but clear-eyed and determined. If you're watching this, Grandpa began, then I'm gone, and you're all hearing the terms of my will. I need to explain why I've set things up this way. Richard sank slowly back into his chair, the color draining from his face. Over the past year, Grandpa continued on screen. I've noticed disturbing changes in how my company is being operated. Accounts I didn't recognize. Signatures that didn't look quite right. Properties being transferred without my clear authorization. Aunt Margaret gasped softly. With James's help, I've documented these irregularities. Richard, I know what you've been doing. Grandpa's voice grew stern. The voice I remembered from childhood when he caught us misbehaving. I know about the Lakeside Properties transaction. I know about the offshore account. I know about the falsified documents. Richard's face had turned ashen. Sophia was gripping his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. I've always believed that a man's character is revealed by what he does when no one is watching. I watched you, Richard. I saw who you really are. Grandpa's expression softened. Matthew, I also saw you. I know you tried to reach me. I know about your investigation. The audit will reveal the truth, but I already know what it will find. The video continued for another 5 minutes, with Grandpa detailing specific transactions he had discovered and his disappointment in Richard's actions. When it ended, the room was deathly silent. This is outrageous. Richard finally sputtered. He was confused. His medication was affecting his judgment. The will was executed with 2 independent physicians present to verify his competence, Jefferson said calmly. Now, shall I continue with Section B of the will? This is a setup, Richard shouted, standing again. Matthew got to him, somehow manipulated him when he was vulnerable. Richard Thomas Jefferson's voice cut through the outburst. You should be aware that the audit has already begun. Preliminary findings have been reported to the district attorney's office as required by law when there is evidence of financial exploitation of an elderly person. Richard's face contorted with rage. You had no right. Those were private company matters. Actually, I said quietly, they were Grandpa's company matters. You just thought they were yours. Richard lunged across the table toward me, but Uncle David caught him by the shoulders. Enough. Jefferson's voice was sharp. Mr. Thomas, please control yourself, or I'll have security remove you. Richard shook off Uncle David's hands, but remained standing, breathing heavily. Read the rest, he demanded. Section B, Jefferson continued unruffled. In the event that the audit reveals financial impropriety, my estate shall be distributed as follows. To my grandson, Matthew Thomas, I leave 50% interest in Thomas Real Estate Holdings and all associated properties. The remaining 50% shall be placed in a trust to be managed by the Board of Directors with profits directed to the charitable foundations listed in Appendix C. This is theft, Richard hissed. I built that company while Matthew was drawing pictures. I expanded it, made it profitable. You stole from your own grandfather, I said, finally letting my anger show. You isolated him, took advantage of him, and forged his signature. That's the real theft. I did what was necessary. He was too sentimental, too stuck in the past. That company needed my vision. Richard, Aunt Margaret's voice trembled. Did you really do those things William accused you of? Richard's wild eyes darted around the room, seeing no allies. This isn't over, he snarled, grabbing his jacket. I'll contest this. No judge will uphold this vindictive change to his will. The evidence is quite comprehensive, Jefferson noted. But you're welcome to try. Richard stormed out, Sophia hurrying after him. The door slammed with such force that the paintings on the wall rattled. After a moment of stunned silence, Jefferson continued with the remaining smaller bequests to family members and longtime employees. When the formal reading concluded, he handed me a sealed envelope. Your grandfather asked that I give you this privately. Aunt Margaret approached me, tears in her eyes. Matthew, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what Richard was doing, the things he told us about you. It's okay, I said, though. The hurt was still fresh. Richard has always been convincing. After everyone left, I opened the letter in the privacy of Jefferson's office. Dear Matthew, it began in Grandpa's steady hand. If you're reading this, then the truth has come to light. I'm sorry for the pain this situation must have caused you. I knew something was wrong, but it took me too long to see through Richard's deceptions. The letter continued, explaining how Grandpa had slowly realized what was happening, how he had felt trapped and isolated, and how he had finally found a way to reach out to Jefferson. I always saw your true heart, Matthew. Your brother wanted my money. You wanted my time. That tells me everything I need to know about both of you. The company needs your creativity, your compassion, and your integrity more than it needs another ruthless businessman. The final paragraph brought tears to my eyes. The watch I left you was my father's. He taught me that time reveals all truths eventually. You took the time to fight for what was right, not what was profitable. That makes you the true heir to everything I valued most. I'm proud of you, son. Make something beautiful from all this. I carefully folded the letter, wiping my eyes. What will you do now? Jefferson asked gently. Honor his wishes, I said. Make something beautiful. The year following Grandpa's death was both challenging and healing. The forensic audit revealed the full extent of Richard's crimes, nearly $2 million diverted to personal accounts, multiple forged signatures, and fabricated board meeting minutes. Criminal charges followed, and Richard eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid a longer prison sentence. The hardest part wasn't managing the company, although that was certainly a steep learning curve for someone with a background in design. The real challenge was rebuilding relationships with family members who had been poisoned against me by Richard's lies. Some bridges couldn't be repaired. Others took months of patience and proven actions to restore trust. I brought my own vision to Thomas Real Estate Holdings. We established a design division that specialized in affordable housing with aesthetic appeal. We created community spaces in our commercial properties, and we launched a foundation in Grandpa's name that provided art education in underserved neighborhoods. Your grandfather would be proud, Jefferson told me, when he visited the newly renovated headquarters a year later. You've honored his legacy while creating your own. The watch Grandpa gave me never leaves my wrist. Sometimes in quiet moments, I swear I can feel his presence, especially when making difficult decisions. I ask myself what Grandpa would do, what values he would uphold. Richard served 8 months in a minimum security facility before being released on probation. We haven't spoken since the will reading. Occasionally, I hear rumors about him starting over in another state, telling grandiose stories about his business expertise. Some patterns don't change, but I've changed. Through this painful journey, I've learned what Grandpa tried to teach us all along. Integrity isn't just a nice word to throw around at family dinners. It's the foundation everything else is built upon. Without it, no amount of money or power brings satisfaction. Sometimes I visit Grandpa's grave early in the morning as the sun rises. I tell him about the company, about the lives we're impacting, about the beauty we're creating in the world. In those moments, I feel a profound peace, knowing that the true inheritance he left wasn't measured in dollars, but in wisdom and purpose. The watch on my wrist keeps perfect time, just as Grandpa always said it would. It reminds me daily of his final message. Of all the things I built in my lifetime, what matters most is not what I accumulated, but what I passed on. Not the wealth, but the values. Remember that, Matthew, and you'll always be rich in the ways that truly matter. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted your sibling earlier or handled things differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that integrity still matters. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't found in a will, but in the lessons we carry forward.